So up to this point, we've ended up getting our modules from either things that were installed with Node or things that we ended up installing ourselves. And that's what's in the Node modules folder. But we might want to separate things out as this application gets bigger, and it will. We might want to have different files that end up doing different things. So for instance, one of the things we might want to do is have some module. Now, this is going to be our own module. I'm going to call it DB. Since it's our own, it's going to be installed not in the Node modules folder, but it's going to be installed somewhere in our project. And I'm just going to say db.js. Now, the second that I do that, this will end up blowing up and saying I can't find DB. But we could create DB. And if I do that, that error message ends up going away, even though there's nothing in the file. And in fact, just to show you something here, if I was to go over here and console log DB, it'll tell me that this is an object, even though I'm not doing anything really in that file. Well, one of the things that I might want to do, this might be my data layer, and maybe what I could end up doing here is go over to DB, and I could end up putting these users here. And maybe I want to use these users, and I'll go over here and I'll create this function called getUsers. And this is going to end up just returning my users. And I might think, boy, that's good. That should work, right? I have these getUsers, so I've got DB. And maybe what I could do here is do DB getUsers. And if I do this, this will end up building. But when I go to refresh my application and I look at this endpoint, I'll see an error. And the error is going to be, hey, look, you have a problem. DB getUsers is not a function. Don't forget, I could always go over here and get that same message by putting in API users, and I'll get that same message, DB getUsers is not a function. And that's true. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is when we end up creating our own modules, Node has a different system than the browser does. In the browser, everything's in a big namespace. With Node, we've got to be very specific. And so we don't end up loading this file ourselves, but when this file gets loaded, it's going to end up getting passed an object called module. And to make a long story short, whatever we want to be available to folks that end up using our module, we've got to assign it to module exports. So now what we could do is we could say module exports, and this is just an object. We could say get users we want to make available, right? This is the equivalent of the syntactic sugar, which is the same as this. And now if we do that and we refresh this, we'll be back in business. So the important thing is that when you have a module or you want to separate things out, you have to remember it's not just a question of putting it in the file and including it. You have to end up exporting whatever you want to end up exporting. And this gives us the ability to separate things out. So if this was our data layer, and let's say it was making calls to a file to get this data, or it was making a call to a database, we could end up separating it out into a separate module. And how do we know it's our module? Because we see this /DB. Right now we're putting everything on the same level, which is fine. We could put them on different levels and end up going to another folder if we end up having our file there. But right now this works out just fine.